Hi, my name is Lisa Flanagan, and I work in youth services at the Watauga County Public Library in Boone, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation on decodable books in libraries. My goal for those who attend this presentation is that you will feel empowered with the knowledge that you need to make choices that will benefit your patrons around this topic. The library is an arena of possibility, opening both a window into the soul and a door onto the world. But these possibilities are not available to those who struggle to read. Creating access to those windows, doors, and other possibilities is what fuels my desire to spread the word about resources that the library can offer as they become literacy first responders in their communities. And libraries really are one of the most equitable places for this to take place. So, how is it that I happen to be speaking to you on this topic today? Although this journey will span nearly 40 years, I'm going to consolidate it into 4 minutes, and it begins with accidentally teaching. When I graduated from Appalachian State University with an educational media degree, I had earned a K-12 teaching certification, meaning I could work as a librarian in K-12 school libraries. Because of this certification, I was actually asked to teach in a combination classroom of 4-year-olds through second graders. Although I protested that I really wasn't qualified to do that kind of teaching, the hiring organization continued to pursue me, and since I was in need of a job, I accepted the position and cried nearly every day of that school year as I felt so woefully unprepared for the task before me. Thankfully, I was provided with a well laid out curriculum, and because the curriculum used a systematic phonetic approach to teach reading, I was actually successful in teaching the non-readers how to read. It felt like magic to me, and I was able to see the overlap of skills taught across these years of instruction. Fast forward 25 years. I was now working in a public library and had the opportunity to participate in the Supercharged Storytime training, which changed the course of how I would offer library story times and programming moving forward. One of the programs we created as a result of this training was based on Buncombe County's preschool outreach program. But instead of creating outreach storytime kits around themes like friendship or colors, we designed storytelling kits based on the letters of the alphabet and filled them with books and manipulatives and puppets and scripts and songs and flannel board ideas to highlight alphabet recognition and phonemic awareness. And then we trained volunteers to use these materials to provide story times in local preschools on a monthly basis. Well, that program led to an expansion through an IMLS LSTA grant opportunity. We were able to do something very similar by using paid storytime providers who went into all of the kindergarten classes weekly during the school year with the same style of highly engaging story times. Concurrently, during this time period, I was also pursuing my MLIS. It took me nearly 5 years, but I finally received my master's degree at the age of 58, and the coursework for that degree would continue to shape my thoughts on how to best serve our patrons in the realm of early literacy. For the assignment where we had to create a LibGuide, I decided I would create one highlighting the kinds of books that I had used to teach reading all those years before, only to find out that those books didn't appear to exist. I was struggling to synthesize all that I was learning and how best to make a difference as a librarian when the pandemic hit. With children now learning through online Zoom classes, it became apparent to many caregivers that some children were often guessing, skipping words, and using pictures rather than learning to read. Podcasts and online discussions became more prevalent as people were looking for solutions that would help children overcome these challenges. Thankfully, it wouldn't be too much longer before I would stumble upon Let's Talk Decodable Books and Literacy Resources Facebook page, sponsored by the Teach My Kid to Read website. The founder of those two resources is Marian Waldman. When her daughter was diagnosed years ago with dyslexia, Marian went to the library to ask the librarian for the books that she could use to help her child learn to read, again only to find out that there really weren't many. So Marian has made it part of her mission to help libraries provide these materials to the communities that they serve. As their website states, the road to decode leads to the library. With some help from Marion, her team, and the resources they have curated, I applied for 2 grants and was awarded nearly $5,000 to build our decodable book collection of nearly 1,000 titles. So, what is a decodable book? Libraries have always been great at providing books that would support phonemic awareness and alphabetic knowledge, and many also carry the Bob books to support early readers as well. And I'm sure you're familiar with the books that are typically found in the easy reader collections of public libraries. So let's start with an example of a book that you might recommend to a parent looking for a book for their beginning reader. You might suggest any number of books that have been labeled Level 1 by the publishing company, like this DK Reader. But imagine the frustration of the child when they encounter a word like camouflage. So these leveled readers are not what we're talking about in this discussion of decodable books. Now you may be wondering, well, how did that publisher arrive at the Level 1 category? And that's a great question. The criteria for leveling these books is determined by individual publishers, and they often include formulas like how many words are repeated, the total word count for the book, the number of high-frequency words to total words, sentence length, size of font, and number of words on a page, none of which take into account phonics skills being taught. And because each publisher comes up with their own leveling system, a Level 1 book from one publisher can be vastly different from a Level 1 book from a different publisher. Linda Ferrel and Michael Hunter do a fantastic job in their 1-hour webinar of explaining the difference between leveled or guided readers and decodable books and the purpose of each, if you would like to take a deeper dive into this topic. They break this information down in a way that is communicated very effectively. It would actually make a great resource to share with any teachers, parents, or tutors who might want more information on this topic. So that's an example of what a decodable book is not, but what is a decodable book? A decodable book is a book that a student has the phonics skills to decode or sound out most of the words. And with this definition, you can see that it would be the child that actually determines the decodability of any given book. So decodable books will, and I'm sorry for the educational jargon that I'm about to use, include a scope and sequence, which just means that they will tell you the order in which the different skills will be presented. And then the purpose of decodable books is for practicing those skills because practice makes permanent. I once heard someone say that even War and Peace is a decodable book when you know enough of the code. So, with this definition in mind, let's move on with a quick run-through of 10 different publishers of decodable books. But I did want to emphasize a couple of things. First, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm just introducing you to some of the publishers that I have had personal experience with so far, and I will be providing you with 4 pages of resource notes that will include links to each of these publishers as well as a link to where you can find a list of even more decodable books to investigate. And second, I wanted to mention that I am not affiliated with any of these resources in any way. You may be familiar with the Toni Morrison quote, "If there's a book that you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." To some degree, that expresses the way I feel about this presentation. I'm just trying to provide my fellow youth services librarians with the kind of presentation that I wish I had had access to as I began this journey. So let's start with Little Learners Love Literacy. These have been one of the most popular sets that we've purchased. The books are grouped into stages, and here you can see that stage 1 covers 8 letter sounds. Now, some libraries might choose to circulate these books individually, but we decided to try as much as possible to group books into sets of similar skills. So we grouped the first 5 books in stage 1 and placed them in a bag that you see here so that children can have a cohesive set of books to practice with. Now, the 8 letters that are highlighted in stage 1 reminds me of a story I once heard told regarding the frustration that children must feel when they're taught just a few letter sounds, but then they're given a book to read that has very few of those sounds in it for them to practice, like that DK Level 1 reader that we looked at earlier. It would be like teaching someone addition and then giving them a test on multiplication. So this is what decodable books are for, providing the opportunity to practice the sounds of the letters that were recently introduced and then blending those sounds together into words. This next slide shows you how the skills progress, with each stage building upon the letters introduced in the previous stages. The scope and sequence is clearly laid out on the back of each book, and if a caregiver doesn't want to start at the beginning and work their way through the set of books, they could look here and jump in wherever they felt their child most needs support. And that will pretty much hold true for each publisher, although some publishers do provide a short diagnostic test to help determine where a child should begin with their program. Each of these books also includes a brief introductory explanation page of how to use the book. And the Little Learner's website also includes a wealth of information for those who might want more support, to include a webinar on how to use their books. And there's now a set of nonfiction readers from this publisher that follows that same scope and sequence for extra practice opportunities. We've been storing our decodables in these clear bins, but you can see that the books stay mostly checked out. And I'm including a close-up of the bags so that you can see what we came up with in regard to labeling, so that patrons have an idea of the skills covered in the books in the bag without having to open each bag. Another set that is equally as popular are the Beanstalk books, and on this slide you can see their scope and sequence, which is broken down into phases. Phase 1 deals with phonemic awareness, and Phase 2 incorporates 19 letter sounds with some additions of double consonants. And then Phase 3 introduces 25 more sounds that steadily build on top of Phase 1, and then the other phases progressively build on that foundation. On the Beanstalk website, they claim that they are the world's largest science of reading book collection, and these next few slides will show you why that may be true. On this slide, you can see they have 2 fiction sets of books that allow for the sequential practice of those first 19 letter sounds. Then, they have 2 sets of nonfiction books that follow the same progression or sequence. And another set called the Beanies, which they say are for the older, struggling, or reluctant reader, or those with dyslexia, which also provide practice for those same 19 sounds. And finally, they have a science set that provides practice for those same letter sounds. That is a lot of opportunity to practice, and one reason that Beanstalk might actually be the world's largest science of reading book collection. The Express readers also have a scope and sequence. However, they do not have books that focus on just a few letters of the alphabet at a time, like the ones we have discussed up to this point. Instead, their Step 1 books feature all the letters and short vowel sounds. And an added dimension of fun in the Express readers is that bug appears somewhere on every page in every book, so that provides a little bit of a seek and find element for children. Each step of the Express readers progresses sequentially, with Step 2 incorporating double consonant letters like CK in duck and the GL in glad, and Step 3 includes books that have diagraphs like the sounds of CH, SH, and TH. Because there is not nearly as much practice per skill introduced, we decided to circulate these titles individually instead of grouping them into bags. The Express readers are an excellent option for decoding practice, but I do think that it would be important to have some of the sets from the previously mentioned publishers to provide the practice for children who need to work at the decoding process at a bit slower of a pace. There are also additional resources on the Express Readers website, to include a free webinar series that includes a webinar specifically for libraries and another one specifically for parents. I'm going to pick up the pace a bit as we discuss Flyleaf. Again, like the other publishers of decodable books, Flyleaf lays out their scope and sequence on their website, and their decodable book collection supports that order. But one thing that makes Flyleaf extra special, in my opinion, is that throughout the pandemic years and even this upcoming school year of 2023 through 24, they are making their decodable books available to read online for free. So here you see the titles that were listed in the previous scope and sequence, and here you can see the inside of the book that children can read online for free. Next, we have the Half-Pint decodable books, which were created by a kindergarten teacher who had been trained in Orton-Gillingham so that her students could practice the concepts they were learning. The website where you can order the books is one that I would consider pointing patrons to who are looking for some extra support. The Fun Activities tab takes you to a collection of reading games that could be played at home, and the Let's Teach tab takes you to over 100 pages of teaching ideas for each level of the Half-Pint readers. And finally, the Activity Pages tab takes you to downloadable worksheets like these. Pictured in this slide is the scope and sequence for the Level A books, which we group in sets for circulation, and there's a booklet with each level that explains little games that can be played with children to reinforce practice of the concepts. Additionally, this is another publisher that is making their books available for free digitally online for the upcoming school year. The S.P.I.R.E decodable book set has been interesting in that they're not getting checked out as frequently as the others. It's a well-done set of books, but I think perhaps because they aren't as colorful as the previous sets, maybe that's why they're not getting as much traction. They do progress pretty quickly through their scope and sequence, as you can see here, so children who need more practice might get frustrated a bit more quickly with this pace. I grouped these into sets for checkout, but because of that quicker pace in covering the skills, I'm rethinking this, and I may change these to circulate as individual titles to see if that might have an effect on their popularity. Because these had such good reviews, I really wanted to make them available to our patrons. But an unexpected challenge was that for this set, pictured here, there is no way to get around a $61 freight charge. So that's just something that I thought you might want to be aware of. Where S.P.I.R.E moves quickly, beginning reading instruction moves extremely slowly. The first book in this series, which has 100 pages, only covers 5 sounds. You can view these as ebooks through the Teach My Kid to Read website, which has additional support materials. Phonic Books. This is such a great series in general, but especially for older students who need to catch up, and the illustrations have been created with that in mind. The scope and sequence is similar to others I have shown you in this presentation, yet the stories and characters are designed to appeal to older students while still providing the practice that students need to become fluent readers. There are many things that make these decodable books special, and I address those in a 5-minute video you can view on our YouTube channel. But one I will mention here is that this is another publisher that has created several parallel series so that students have the opportunity to practice the same skills with multiple sets of books, kind of like the Beanstalk books discussed earlier. All About Reading is actually a reading curriculum, but it was very thoughtfully designed by a mother whose child was severely dyslexic. I'm going to talk more about the curriculum a bit later in this presentation, but for now, let me say that the readers that go along with this curriculum are excellent, and the only ones I've found so far that are in hardback format. This is helpful on 2 fronts: easy shelving for libraries, and children who struggle to read are usually very excited to have a hardback book that looks like a chapter book that they can read. The scope and sequence can be found on their website, not actually in the book, so I will include a link to find that in the resource pages. It can be a little tricky to find the readers on the website, so I thought I would show you that when you go to place an order, you have to actually click on individual products to reveal a drop-down menu where the readers can be purchased individually. I have saved Geodes for last because they're different from everything else we've discussed so far. The catchphrase for Geodes is that children should be able to read to learn while they're learning to read, and they've worked hard to create a resource that does that. The kindergarten level is uniquely different in that it has 3 different types of books. There are a couple of wordless books in which children learn to retell stories, to practice vocabulary, story sequence, background knowledge, and comprehension. Next come several sound search books so that children can focus on 2 or 3 specific sounds per book. And the rest are duet books in which the parent and child each have a part to read on each 2-page spread. And I do have a 5-minute video that explains the kindergarten level books in a bit more detail. Pictured here is a book from the next level, level 1, and each book includes a page with more background information for the content being introduced, and the back of each book includes a decodability rating based on the skills that have been introduced up to this point of their scope and sequence. Geodes are usually sold to schools, so it was challenging to navigate how to make this resource available for our library, because even with grant funding, the price and grouping of the materials was challenging. I ended up purchasing a tutor kit, which gave us 1 color paperback copy of each title, and a teacher's resource book, which we make available for patrons to use. Well, these are just 10 decodable book options that I felt I could provide a bit of insight into. There are many more fabulous options, and I hope you've been inspired to investigate that further. So why should libraries consider carrying decodable books? I hope this presentation has demonstrated what a valuable resource they are in the early literacy arsenal. Additionally, libraries are one of the few places that provide equitable access to this wonderful resource. It's a great support to parents or caregivers who are trying to support a child on the reading journey. I've actually had a parent tear up as they expressed their appreciation that they had access to these books through our library. And I found them to be a great support to teachers as well. Teachers can look at the options we have available to help determine which sets they might want to request funding to purchase for their classrooms. And having a variety of sets in the library will enable experimentation to match resources that work best for any given reader. Okay, now we have a few minutes left over to cover a couple of things that I thought might provide some extra support, both for your patrons and for you as a librarian. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, just what I've had experience with and feel comfortable recommending. And we'll start with resources for patrons. And the first one is PRENDA Treasure Hunt Reading Program. This free resource, and I do mean free, you don't even have to provide an email address to get access to it. This resource follows an Orton Gillingham approach to literacy. And what I love about this resource is how simple it is, and yet it provides a great deal of support. There are just 2 web pages, one to help you get started with a 15-minute introductory video, and a link to free worksheet pages. And then the other page contains these clickable boxes that lead you to a video lesson that is usually not more than 10 minutes long. I love that they stress that there's no right pace for working through the program, but instead they allow each reader to kind of decide how quickly to progress. And students can keep track of their progress by filling in a circle on this treasure map as each video lesson is completed on the journey to becoming a more fluent reader. This next resource idea would be to provide patrons with an entire grade level of curriculum like All About Reading. This curriculum was created by a mother who was told there was no hope for her child to learn to read, but she felt that failure was not an option. The curriculum comes in a sturdy tote bag provided by the publisher, but it has been in constant circulation, so we have switched over to storing the curriculum in a clear backpack so that it can be more easily transported without losing any of the components. And several of our patrons have actually ended up purchasing this curriculum for themselves after they borrowed our set. And finally, the Ordinary Parent's Guide to Teaching Reading provides a script to use in leading a student through the reading process that really is perfect for the quote-unquote ordinary parent. And it's an affordable option for most libraries to have on hand. My all-time favorite resource for libraries on this topic is the Teach My Kid to Read website, whose founder is Marian Waldman, who I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. Part of the mission of the Teach My Kid to Read team is to support public and school libraries to improve literacy for all. Their website has information especially for libraries, including access to the Beginning Reading Instruction program. And it's on their website where you can find a list of many more decodable book options. They also have a YouTube channel of resources which includes interviews with librarians who are adding decodable books to their collections, as well as interviews with publishers of decodable books. And their Facebook page, Let's Talk Decodable Books and Literacy Resources, also provides support on an almost daily basis. Another resource worth investigating is the Richland County Public Library in Columbia, South Carolina. Starting back in 2012, they began expanding their collections and their programming to serve struggling readers. Over the years, they have grown to serve a multitude of struggling and emergent readers and developed community partnerships. So they've been working in this realm for over 10 years, and they've indicated that they are more than happy to provide more in-depth guidance in regard to this topic. So I will include their contact information in the resource pages. And I hope that our YouTube channel will be a resource for you. as we continue to create a series of videos about decodable books in libraries. In regard to funding, we were able to write a Dollar General literacy grant to fund part of our collection, and then we applied for a local community grant. Our local Blue Ridge Energy Membership Foundation, whose funds come from people just rounding up their electric bill payments, considered a decodable book collection a worthwhile project to fund. Our Friends of the Library has also been supportive. I haven't personally reached out to the International Dyslexia Association, but I do know that the South Carolina chapter of that organization was very supportive in providing decodable books for the Richland County Public Library, because although decodable books support all beginning readers, they are especially beneficial for those who struggle with dyslexia or other learning difficulties. I would be happy to take any questions you might have as soon as this recording comes to an end. So thank you for your time, and ta-ta for now.